I lay there torn open and stitched back together, fighting for every single breath in that sterile, freezing hospital bed. My parents stood over me, but they were not holding my hand. They were not praying for my recovery. I heard my father tell the doctor with a terrifying urgency, "Take her organ. Save our son. Do it now." And then my mother added the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Do not hesitate, doctor. She is just a burden anyway." They thought I was unconscious. They thought I was helpless. They had no idea I was awake, and they certainly had no idea what I was about to do to make them regret the day they decided to carve me up for spare parts. My name is Monique, and at 32 years old, I thought the car accident was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was wrong. The betrayal waiting for me in the recovery room was far deadlier than any crash. Before I tell you how I turned their cruelty into their destruction, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. And please hit that subscribe button and like this video if you have ever had to fight a battle against the very people who were supposed to protect you. The darkness was heavy, pressing down on my eyelids like lead weights. I tried to lift my hand, but my body refused to obey. A white-hot fire radiated from my chest down to my legs, pulsing in rhythm with the steady, rhythmic beeping of the machines beside me. My throat felt like it was stuffed with broken glass, dry and raw. I was trapped in my own body, unable to move, unable to scream, but my hearing was terrifyingly sharp. It was as if my brain, sensing the danger, had dialed up my senses to maximum volume. Click, click, click. The sharp, aggressive sound of stiletto heels pacing the linoleum floor echoed in the small room. I knew that sound anywhere. It was Jessica, my sister-in-law. Her voice cut through the air, sharp and nasal, completely devoid of empathy. "This is a disaster, Trey, an absolute disaster. Do you know how much the deductible is on the Range Rover and the press? If the firm finds out you were driving, we are finished. You need to stick to the story, okay?" Monique was driving. Then came a low, pathetic moan from the bed next to mine. My brother Trey. But I knew that whine. It was the same sound he made when he wanted money for his habits, or when he got caught doing something he shouldn't have. It was the sound of manipulation. "My back hurts, Jess. I need my meds. Where is the doctor? Why are they focusing on her? I am the one who needs help. My kidneys are failing. I can feel it." "You are fine, baby Jessica," cooed, her voice shifting instantly from angry to sickly sweet. "We just need to wait for your parents. They are handling the doctors. Once they sign the papers, we can get what we need from her. She won't be using it anyway. Look at her. She is a mess." Rage began to boil in my stomach, hotter than the pain in my broken bones. I wanted to open my eyes and scream that I was the one who pulled the steering wheel. I was the one who saved us. But the anesthesia was still a heavy fog in my mind, keeping me paralyzed. The heavy door swung open and the air in the room shifted. I smelled my mother's expensive perfume, a scent that used to mean comfort, but now smelled like cold steel. "Doctor, my father," Calvin's voice boomed deep and demanding. "We do not have time for pleasantries. We need a timeline. Is the organ viable?" My heart hammered against my ribs, triggering a faster beep on the monitor, but no one seemed to notice, or perhaps they just didn't care. I waited for them to ask if I was okay. I waited for my mother Sheila to ask if her daughter was in pain, if she would walk again. Instead, she spoke with a chilling calmness that sent a shiver down my spine. "Look at the monitors, Calvin. She is stable. She is strong as an ox, she always has been. That girl could survive a nuclear war. Take the kidney now while the trauma is fresh. Save Trey. He is the priority here." A third voice, tired and professional, cut through their demands. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, I have explained this. We cannot just harvest a kidney from a living patient without explicit consent, regardless of the brother's condition or the family's wishes. She is comatose, but she is not brain dead. There are laws, HIPAA regulations, ethical standards." My mother let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Laws. We are her parents. We are her voice, while she is lying there useless. She is single childless, and frankly, she has always been a burden on this family's resources. We have fed her, clothed her, and tolerated her independence long enough. Trey is the one with a future. Trey is the one who carries the family name. Do whatever paperwork you need to do, doctor. Declare it an emergency. Just get it done. I felt like I had been slapped. A burden. I was the one who paid off their mortgage 3 years ago. I was the one who bailed Trey out of jail when he got caught with possession. I was the risk assessment director for a major firm, not a child asking for handouts. But in their eyes, I was nothing more than a spare parts bin for their golden son. The room went silent save for the hum of machinery. I felt the vibration of their footsteps leaving the room, likely to go harass an administrator or bribe someone to get their way. Jessica and Trey must have fallen asleep or left because the clicking heels stopped. I summoned every ounce of willpower I had. I focused on a single point of light behind my eyelids. Open. Open. Slowly, painfully, my eyes fluttered open. The harsh fluorescent lights burned my retinas, forcing tears to stream down my face. I blinked, trying to clear the blur. I looked down at my body. My left leg was encased in thick plaster elevated on a sling. My chest was wrapped in heavy bandages that constricted my breathing. Memories of the crash flooded back like a tidal wave, crashing over me with brutal clarity. The rain-slicked road on the I-90. Trey's eyes glazed over from the pills he had popped at his birthday party, his head lolling onto his chest. The car drifting toward the concrete divider at 70 miles per hour. Me screaming his name, him not waking up. I remembered unbuckling my seatbelt, throwing my body over the center console to grab the wheel. I remembered the sickening crunch of metal as I steered us away from a head-on collision with a truck, taking the impact on my side of the car to save him. I had broken my own body to keep him safe, and this was my reward, being carved up. The door handle turned. Panic surged through me. I wasn't ready to face them. I tried to speak, to call for help, but only a dry, raspy sound came out. A nurse I did not recognize walked in. She wasn't the kind doctor who had defended me. She looked tired and indifferent, holding a syringe filled with a clear liquid. I tried to croak out a word. No. I tried to shake my head to show her I was conscious that I did not consent. But she didn't look at my eyes. She didn't check my chart. She just walked straight to my IV line. Your heart rate is too high, she muttered more to herself than to me. Your parents said you were agitated before the crash. We need you to sleep so the swelling goes down. I tried to grab her wrist, but my hand only twitched uselessly. She injected the fluid into my line. Shh, honey, she said dismissively, patting my hand with a patronizing touch. Just relax. It is better if you rest. The doctor will be back in the morning to discuss the procedure for your brother. As the blackness dragged me back down heavy and suffocating, I realized with terrifying clarity that they were not trying to heal me. They were preparing me. I was alone, trapped in a hospital that listened to my parents' money rather than my rights. But as the last sliver of light faded, I made a silent vow. If I woke up from this, I would take everything from them. Everything. The anesthesia pulled me under, but it could not drown out the memories. As my body went limp, the film reel of the last 48 hours played behind my eyelids with agonizing clarity. I needed to remember exactly how I ended up broken in this bed, because the truth was my only weapon left. It started 2 days ago at Trey's 29th birthday party. The bass from the speakers was shaking the walls of the downtown loft my parents had rented for him. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and something acrid and chemical. I found Trey in the kitchen, leaning heavily against the marble island. His eyes were pinned tiny black dots in a sea of red, and his skin had that clammy, waxy look that terrified me. He was swaying on his feet, holding the keys to the brand new Range Rover my parents had just gifted him. I tried to take the keys. I told him he was in no condition to walk, let alone drive a 3-ton vehicle. He just laughed a wet, sloppy sound and shoved me backward. I looked around for help. My mother Sheila was holding a glass of champagne, chatting with her friends. When I told her Trey was high and trying to drive, she just waved her hand dismissively. "Let the boy have fun, Monique," she said. "It is his birthday, stop being such a killjoy." My father didn't even look up from his phone. Realizing no one would stop him, I did the only thing I could. I forced myself into the passenger seat. If I could not stop him, I had to supervise him. I had to make sure he didn't kill anyone. The rain started 10 minutes into the drive. It came down in sheets, turning the highway into a black mirror. Trey was driving too fast, his head nodding forward, his grip on the wheel slack. I kept shouting his name, trying to keep him awake, but he was fading. Then it happened. His eyes rolled back and his heavy foot slipped onto the gas pedal. The car surged forward, hydroplaning across 3 lanes toward the concrete divider. I didn't think. I just reacted. I threw my body across the center console, grabbing the wheel with my left hand to steer us away from a semi-truck. I took the full force of the impact. The world exploded into metal and glass. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Trey's seatbelt locking him safely in place while my side of the car crumpled like a soda can. The memory shifted to the immediate aftermath. This was the part that hurt more than the broken bones. I was pinned in the wreckage, the dashboard crushing my legs. I could taste copper and gasoline. Through the shattered windshield, I saw headlights pulling up behind us. It was Jessica. She had been following us in her sedan. I felt a surge of relief. My sister-in-law was here. She would call 911. She would help me. I watched her run toward the car through the rain. She looked into the driver's side and saw Trey groaning but unharmed. Then she looked at me. I reached a bloody hand out to her, pleading for help, but Jessica didn't reach back. She looked around the empty highway, her face twisting into a mask of cold calculation. She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a half-empty bottle of vodka. She didn't use it to disinfect my wounds. She uncapped it and poured it over my clothes, drenching me in the smell of alcohol. Then she shoved the bottle into my crushed handbag on the floor. I tried to scream, but my lungs were punctured. I watched in horror as she took a handkerchief from her pocket and wiped down the steering wheel, erasing Trey's fingerprints. Then she did the unthinkable. She grabbed my limp, bleeding hand and pressed it onto the wheel, rubbing my palms against the leather to transfer my prints. She was framing me. She was staging the scene to look like I was the drunk driver. She looked me dead in the eye and whispered, "You are the big sister, Monique. You take care of him, right? That is your job." Then she stepped back and finally dialed 911, putting on a frantic, crying act for the operator. The memory faded into the harsh reality of the hospital room. I opened my eyes to see a uniformed police officer standing at the foot of my bed. My throat felt like it was stuffed with razor blades. I realized with panic that I was intubated. A tube was forcing air into my lungs. I could not speak. I could not defend myself. Jessica was standing next to the officer, her hand resting possessively on the railing of my bed. She looked impeccable. Her makeup was fresh, and her eyes were red-rimmed with performative grief. "Officer, it was terrifying," she said, her voice trembling perfectly. "Monique has been struggling with alcohol for years. We tried to stop her from driving. Trey begged her to give him the keys, but she was belligerent. She insisted on driving her brother home for his birthday. She nearly killed him." The officer scribbled in his notebook, looking at me with undisguised disgust. I thrashed against the sheets, the monitors beeping wildly. I wanted to tear the tube out of my throat and scream the truth. I wanted to tell him about the vodka, the prints, the opioids in Trey's system. Jessica leaned in closer, pretending to comfort me. She took my hand, the one with the IV line, and squeezed. It wasn't a gentle hold. She dug her manicured nails into my palm, grinding my bones together. It was a warning. A physical threat right under the officer's nose. "Shh, Monique," Jessica cooed, staring daggers into my eyes. "Save your strength. You are going to need it. We are handling everything. Just accept what you did." The officer shook his head, closing his notebook. "We will wait for the toxicology report, but with the open container found in the vehicle and witness testimony, it looks pretty open and shut. You are looking at vehicular assault and reckless endangerment, ma'am." I stopped thrashing. I went perfectly still. The pain in my hand where Jessica was digging her nails in sharpened my focus. They thought they had won. They thought my silence was defeat. They were wrong. I looked at Jessica, and I let all the fear drain out of my eyes, replacing it with a cold, hard promise. I would not speak another word. Not to the nurses, not to my parents, and certainly not to the police. I would stay silent until I had my lawyer in this room, and when I finally opened my mouth, I would not just defend myself. I would burn their entire house of lies to the ground. The scratch of the pen against the discharge papers sounded loud enough to shatter my eardrums. I watched helplessly as my father Calvin signed his name with a flourish, effectively signing my transfer from a hospital where I had rights to a prison where I would have none. The attending physician looked hesitant, his eyes darting between my casted leg and my parents' stone-cold faces. He tried to argue that I needed observation, that my vitals were still fluctuating, but my mother Sheila cut him off with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She placed a hand on his arm, feigning maternal concern. "We have hired a private nurse, doctor. Her room is fully equipped. We just want our baby girl home where she belongs." It was a lie so smooth it almost sounded like love. I tried to glare at the doctor, to telepathically beg him to look at my medical chart to see the bruise on my arm from where Jessica had grabbed me, but my body betrayed me. The sedatives they had given me earlier made my head loll to the side. I felt like a rag doll as two orderlies lifted me from the bed into a wheelchair. My father leaned down, his breath smelling of stale coffee and mints, and whispered in my ear so low that only I could hear. "Do not make a scene, Monique. We are doing this for the family. Be grateful." Grateful. I was being kidnapped by my own parents to be harvested for parts, and he wanted gratitude. The ride to my apartment building was a blur of nausea and fear. When the elevator doors pinged open on the penthouse floor, my stomach dropped. This was my sanctuary. I had bought this place with the bonus from my first major risk assessment contract. It was supposed to be the one place where I was safe, where the chaos of my family could not touch me. But as my father wheeled me into the foyer, I realized my sanctuary had been invaded. The air, usually crisp and smelling of lemon verbena, was thick with the scent of fried food and my brother's cheap cologne. My eyes scanned the living room, and a silent scream built in my throat. My pristine white Italian leather sofa, the one I had saved for 6 months to buy, was covered in grease stains and discarded pizza boxes. But that was not the worst part. I looked at the mantel above the fireplace. For years, a large framed portrait of me receiving my master's degree had hung there. It was a symbol of my independence, proof that I had made something of myself despite their neglect. Now it was gone. In its place hung a gaudy, blown-up wedding photo of Trey and Jessica. In the photo, Jessica was smiling that same predatory smile she had worn in the hospital, and Trey looked high even then. They had literally erased me from my own home. My father pushed the wheelchair over a pile of dirty laundry that had been dumped in the middle of the hallway. I tried to reach for the wheels to stop him, to demand an explanation, but my arms were too weak. We passed the guest bedroom and I saw my mother's suitcases exploded all over the bed. I assumed they would put me in there. It was comfortable and it had an ensuite bathroom. I braced myself for the turn into that room, but my father kept walking. He pushed me past the guest room. He pushed me past the office, where I had built my career. Then we approached the master bedroom. My room. The double doors were wide open. Through them, I saw Trey. He was lying in my king-sized bed, wearing his shoes on my Egyptian cotton sheets, eating a burger. He looked up as I passed sauce on his chin and gave me a lazy wave. "Thanks for the upgrade, Mo," he mumbled, his mouth full. "The mattress is a little firm, but I will get used to it." I felt a surge of adrenaline that momentarily cut through the drugs. They had given my bed to the person who almost killed me. My father did not stop. He wheeled me to the end of the hallway, to a narrow door that I used for storage. It was the maid's quarters, a small windowless room that I kept for cleaning supplies and overflow winter coats. Jessica was standing by the door, acting like a hotel concierge, welcoming a guest to a five-star suite. She opened the door with a flourish. "Here we are," she chirped, her voice dripping with fake cheer. "We moved the boxes out and put a cot in here for you. It is cozy, right?" I stared into the cramped space. A flimsy folding cot was shoved against the wall. There was no window, no television, no bathroom, just four gray walls that seemed to be closing in on me. Why, I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. My throat was still raw from the intubation, but I forced the word out. Jessica leaned down, her face inches from mine. The smile vanished, replaced by a sneer of pure contempt. "Because Trey needs the master suite, Monique. He is sick. He needs light and space and good energy to prepare for the surgery. Feng shui is very important for kidney reception. Besides, you do not need all that space just to lie there and recover. You are small. You fit here perfectly." My father locked the wheels of the chair and unceremoniously dumped me onto the cot. Pain shot through my broken leg as it hit the thin mattress. I gasped, tears springing to my eyes. He threw a thin blanket over me, not bothering to straighten it. "Get some rest," he said, turning his back on me. "We have a big day soon." He walked out and Jessica followed him. I watched the door close, plunging me into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the light creeping under the doorframe. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my chest. I needed to call my lawyer. I needed to call Sterling. He would know what to do. He would bring the police. I reached for the pockets of my jacket, expecting to feel the familiar weight of my smartphone. Empty. I patted down the sides of the cot, thinking maybe it fell during the transfer. Nothing. I tried to sit up, groaning as my ribs protested, and scanned the tiny room. My laptop bag, which the nurse had packed for me at the hospital, was nowhere to be seen. The door opened a crack and Jessica's face appeared in the slice of light. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, holding up my iPhone and my MacBook in one hand. "We are holding on to these for safekeeping. The doctor said screen time is bad for your brain recovery. You need total rest. No distractions, no emails, no outside world. Just you and your thoughts, Monique." She winked, a gesture so cruel it felt like a physical blow. Then she slammed the door shut. I heard the distinct click of a lock turning from the outside. The sound echoed in the small room like a gunshot. I lay back in the dark, the silence ringing in my ears. I was trapped in a windowless box in the house I paid for, while my family feasted on my food and plotted to carve up my body. They had taken my space. They had taken my freedom. And now they had cut my only line of communication to the outside world. I was completely, utterly alone. The smell of garlic and rosemary, searing in butter, wafted under the crack of the door, filling my tiny, windowless prison with a torture I had never known. My stomach gave a violent, painful contraction, a reminder that I had not eaten a solid meal in nearly 2 days. I lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clatter of silverware and the sound of wine corks popping in the dining room just 30 feet away. They were celebrating. My parents, my brother and his wife, were sitting at my mahogany dining table, eating steaks that I had likely paid for while I rotted in the maids' quarters. The lock tumbled and the door swung open. The light from the hallway was blinding. My mother stood there, silhouetted like a looming shadow. She was holding a small chipped ceramic bowl that I used to feed my cat before he passed away. She did not step inside. She simply extended her arm and placed the bowl on the floor, shoving it forward with the toe of her shoe as if I were a feral animal she was afraid to touch. "Here," she said, her voice flat and devoid of warmth. "Eat it." I struggled to prop myself up on one elbow, the pain in my ribs flaring hot and sharp. I looked into the bowl. It was oatmeal, but it was cold gray and watery. There was no sugar, no milk, no fruit, just flavorless sludge. "Why?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of hunger and rage. "You are eating steak. I can smell it. Why are you giving me this?" My mother didn't even blink. She wiped her hands on her apron as if just being near me made her dirty. "Steak is heavy, Monique. You have a big procedure coming up. We need your system clean. We cannot have you vomiting on the operating table when they harvest the kidney. This is for your own good. Think of it as a cleanse. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door, looking back with a sneer that chilled my blood. And do not make a mess. I do not want ants in here. The door clicked shut, and the lock turned again. I was left alone with the cold gruel. Tears of humiliation stung my eyes. It wasn't just the hunger, it was the message. To them, I was no longer a person. I was livestock. I was being prepped for slaughter, kept on a strict diet, so my parts would be pristine for their precious son. I forced myself to eat the tasteless paste, swallowing my pride with every spoonful. I needed the energy. I needed to survive. The next morning brought a different kind of torture. Around noon, the doorbell began to ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then came the sound of high heels clicking on the hardwood floors, followed by a chorus of high-pitched performative laughter. Jessica was hosting a party. In my house. While I lay broken in the closet, I dragged myself to the door and pressed my ear against the cold wood. The sounds of the gathering were crystal clear. I heard the distinct melodious chime of my Waterford crystal glasses clinking together. Those glasses were a gift to myself after I closed my first $1 million deal. I kept them in a locked cabinet. Jessica had broken the lock. "Oh, Jessica, this place is absolutely stunning," a voice cooed. I recognized it as Becky, one of Jessica's friends from the country club. "The view of the lake is to die for. You must be so happy." "Thank you," Jessica replied, her voice dripping with false modesty. "It is a bit of a fixer-upper in terms of decor, but we are working on it. Once we get settled, we are going to knock down that wall and open up the space. It feels a bit dark right now." "Where is the sister-in-law you told us about?" another voice asked. "The one who lived here." The room went quiet for a second, and then Jessica sighed, a long, dramatic sound designed to garner sympathy. "Oh, Monique. She is here. She is resting in the back. Honestly, girls, it has been a nightmare. You know how they can be. How who can be, someone asked innocently. You know." Jessica lowered her voice, but I could hear every word. "Single. Career-obsessed. She is very difficult. Angry. She has always been jealous of Trey and me. She drives this flashy car and acts like she is better than everyone. But when it comes to family duty, she is selfish. We are practically forcing her to do the right thing for her brother. It is exhausted dealing with that kind of attitude." The angry black woman stereotype. "You know it is real." A chorus of sympathetic murmurs followed. I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood. She was painting me as the villain in my own tragedy, using every microaggression in the book to dehumanize me to her friends. To them, I wasn't a victim of theft and organ trafficking. I was just an aggressive, jealous obstacle that Jessica was saintly for tolerating. "And what happens after the surgery?" Becky asked. Jessica laughed, the sound of ice rattling in my crystal glass accompanying her words. "Well, recovery takes a long time. And honestly, I do not think she will be in any condition to manage a property this size. Trey and I are already looking at paint swatches. This place needs a woman's touch, not a spinster's clutter." My hands curled into fists. She was not just planning to take my kidney. She was planning to take my life, my home, my reputation. She was burying me before I was even dead. Suddenly, footsteps approached my door. I heard a hand fumble with the knob. "Where is the powder room again, Jess?" a voice called out. "Just down the hall on the left," Jessica shouted back. But the guest, clearly confused, or perhaps a bit tipsy, did not go left. She turned the lock on my door. To my horror, my father must have forgotten to engage the deadbolt fully after bringing me the water earlier. The latch clicked and the door swung open. A woman in a pastel yellow sundress stood there, freezing in her tracks. Light flooded the cramped, windowless maid's room. She looked down and saw me. I must have looked like a monster to her. My hair was matted, my leg was in a cast, and I was lying on a cot surrounded by buckets and mops. "Oh my God," she gasped, stepping back. I did not speak. I did not ask for help. I knew that if I screamed, Jessica would spin it, say I was crazy, say I was attacking her guest. Instead, I used the only weapon I had left, my eyes. I channeled every ounce of fury, every shred of dignity I had left, and I glared at her. I looked at her with such intense, burning hatred that she physically recoiled. I dared her to look away. I dared her to ignore the reality of what she was seeing. She turned pale, her hand flying to her mouth. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask if I was okay. She slammed the door shut and ran back down the hall, her footsteps frantic. I heard her whisper urgently to Jessica, but Jessica just laughed it off. "Oh, do not worry about that room. Just storage. Have another mimosa." The darkness returned, but something had shifted in me. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I stared into the shadows of the closet, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. In the corner on the top shelf sat an old, dusty teddy bear. It was a relic from my childhood, something I had kept for sentimental reasons. But then I remembered. 3 years ago, when I was working on a high-risk corporate espionage case, I had hidden a burner phone inside that bear. It was a standard protocol for my job to have a backup communication line that could not be traced or hacked. I had stashed it there and forgotten about it. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I ignored the pain in my leg. I ignored the hunger in my belly. I dragged myself off the cot, clawing my way up the shelves until my fingers brushed the synthetic fur. I pulled the bear down, ripping open its back seam with trembling fingers. There it was, a small black flip phone. I pressed the power button, holding my breath. The screen flickered to life. 1 bar of battery. No service in this windowless box. But I knew the Wi-Fi password. I knew the network hidden in the walls of my own house. I was not a servant. I was not a victim. I was Monique Vance, and I had just found my voice. The silence of the house at 2 in the morning was heavier than the darkness that filled my tiny, windowless prison. I lay on the cot, listening to the rhythmic settling of the building, waiting for the last floorboard to creak overhead, signaling that Jessica and my parents were finally asleep in the master suite. My body was a map of agony. The painkillers had worn off hours ago, and every breath felt like a jagged knife twisting in my ribs. My broken leg, encased in heavy plaster, throbbed with a dull, sickening rhythm that matched my heartbeat. But I could not afford to sleep. I could not afford to succumb to the pain. I stared into the corner of the room where the outline of the old shelves was barely visible in the sliver of light creeping under the door. High up on the top shelf sat the dusty teddy bear. It was a relic from a childhood I barely remembered, enjoying a time before I became the family scapegoat, and Trey became the golden idol. But 3 years ago, during a high-stakes corporate investigation involving industrial espionage, I had turned that innocent toy into a lifeline. I had stitched a burner phone inside its stuffing, a backup protocol I never thought I would use in my own home. I gritted my teeth and swung my legs off the cot. The movement sent a shockwave of white-hot pain up my spine that nearly made me black out. I bit into my pillow to stifle a scream. I could not wake them. If Jessica found me out of bed, she would suspect something. I dragged myself across the cold linoleum floor, inch by agonizing inch. My cast scraped against the ground, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. I froze, waiting for footsteps. Nothing. I pulled myself up using the metal shelving unit, my arms trembling with the effort. My fingers brushed the synthetic fur of the bear. I gripped it tight and pulled it down, hugging it to my chest as I slid back down to the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely find the seam I had sewn shut years ago. I used the sharp edge of my broken fingernail to rip through the thread. There it was, the cool plastic of a cheap flip phone. I flipped it open and held my breath. The screen flickered to life, casting a ghostly blue glow on my face. 1 bar of battery, 20%. No signal. I cursed silently. Of course there was no signal in this concrete box. But then I remembered the Wi-Fi. I quickly navigated the clunky keypad, typing in the password to my own network. Connected. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I was about to dial my lawyer Sterling when the doorknob turned. Panic surged through me. I shoved the phone and the bear under the thin blanket and threw myself back onto the cot, pretending to be asleep. The door crashed open, slamming against the wall. The light from the hallway flooded in, blinding me. It was Trey. He didn't look like the golden child now. He looked like a cornered animal. His skin was pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wild and darting around the room. He was wearing nothing but his boxer shorts, and he was shivering violently despite the warmth of the house. Withdrawal. I recognized the signs immediately. His supply must have run out and the physical need was tearing him apart. "Where is it, Monique?" he hissed, stumbling into the room and kicking over a bucket of cleaning supplies. "Where do you keep your emergency cash?" "I know you have cash. You always have cash." He began tearing through the shelves, throwing boxes of detergent and rolls of paper towels onto the floor. He ripped the sheets off the spare pillows, looking for a hidden envelope. "Trey, stop," I said, keeping my voice low and calm despite the terror rising in my throat. "I don't have any cash here. Jessica took everything. Go back to bed." He spun around and lunged at me, grabbing the front of my shirt. His breath smelled sour like vomit and chemicals. "You are lying!" he screamed, spit flying onto my face. "You are holding out on me. You always think you are better than me with your job and your money and your perfect life. Give it to me." He shook me, and pain exploded in my chest. I gasped, trying to push him away, but I was too weak. He let go of me suddenly, pacing the small room like a caged tiger clawing at his own arms. "I need something, Mo!" he moaned, his voice cracking. "My back hurts. My head is splitting. I need to score. Just a little bit." "Trey, listen to yourself," I said, reaching under the blanket and finding the phone. I flipped it open by feel my thumb hovering over the voice memo button. "You are sick. You almost killed us both because of this. You need rehab, not money." He laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. "Rehab? I don't need rehab. I need a kidney. Once I get your kidney, I will be brand new. Mom said so. Dad said so. We just swapped the parts and I am back in the game." I pressed the record button. The tiny red light blinked under the blanket. "Is that all I am to you, Trey?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, pushing him to say more. "Just a spare part. I am your sister. I raised you when Mom and Dad were too busy traveling. And now you want to cut me open." He stopped pacing and looked down at me with cold, dead eyes. "You are just a burden, Monique. Mom is right. You are 32 and alone. You live in this big house with no husband and no kids. What is the point of you? I have a wife. I have a future. You have to give me your kidney so I can live and play. You are just taking up space." The cruelty of his words hit me harder than the car crash. He didn't want to live to build a family or do something good. He wanted to live to play, to continue the cycle of waste and destruction. And the accident, Trey, I asked, risking everything. "Do you even remember what happened? Or are you going to let me go to prison for that too?" He sneered, kicking the foot of my cot, sending a jolt of pain through my broken leg. "Who cares who was driving?" "So what if I was driving? I was high. Okay, I couldn't handle the wheel. But you are the big sister. It is your job to fix it. You take the blame. That is what you are for. You fix my messes." He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his pupils blown wide. "And if you try to tell anyone otherwise, I will tell the cops you were the one popping pills. Who are they going to believe? The successful white wife and the grieving parents, or the jealous black spinster sister?" He straightened up, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "I am going to find your purse. I bet Jessica hid it in the office." He turned and stumbled out of the room, leaving the door wide open. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hall before I pulled the phone out. My hands were trembling uncontrollably, but not from fear anymore. From pure, unadulterated rage. I looked at the screen. Recording saved. I immediately opened the Cloud app. My thumb hovered over the upload button. The battery indicator flashed red. 5%. If the phone died before the file uploaded, the evidence would be trapped on this device, and if Jessica found it, I was dead. I pressed upload. The progress bar appeared a thin blue line moving agonizingly slow. 1%, 2%. I heard a crash from the office down the hall. Trey was destroying my workspace. 3%. The screen dimmed, trying to save power. I tapped it awake. Do not die on me now. 4%. I heard Jessica's voice shouting from the master bedroom, waking up to the noise. The footsteps were coming back this way. 99%. Upload complete. The screen went black, just as I heard Jessica shriek my name from the hallway. I shoved the dead phone back inside the teddy bear and threw it into the corner of the room, just as she appeared in the doorway, her face twisted in fury. But it didn't matter what she did to me now. My digital ghost was already in the cloud, and it was screaming the truth loud enough for the whole world to hear. I lay in the darkness of the maids' quarters for what felt like hours, listening to the muffled sounds of my family moving about in my home. The file I had uploaded to the cloud was safe, a digital time bomb waiting to detonate, but my physical reality remained terrifying. The next morning, the lock on my door clicked open, but it was not Jessica or my mother bringing me cold oatmeal. It was my father, Calvin, and behind him stood a man I had never seen before. The stranger was short and balding, wearing a suit that looked expensive but fit poorly. He carried a leather briefcase and smelled of stale tobacco. My father did not introduce him. He simply stepped into the cramped room, kicking aside the bucket I had used to prop up my broken leg. "Sit up, Monique," my father commanded, his voice devoid of any paternal warmth. "We have business to discuss." I struggled to push myself up against the wall, wincing as my ribs protested. I looked at the stranger, my eyes narrowing. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice raspy from dehydration. "This is Mr. Henderson," my father said, gesturing vaguely. "He is a family attorney. He has prepared some documents to streamline your recovery process." Mr. Henderson opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. He handed them to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just standard procedure, Miss Vance. Given your incapacitated state and the trauma of the accident, your parents feel it is best if they can make medical decisions on your behalf. This is a medical power of attorney. It grants them full authority to consent to procedures, surgeries, and treatments if you are unable to do so." I scanned the document. It was not standard. It was a death warrant. The language was broad and sweeping. It gave them the power to consent to organ donation, experimental surgeries, and even the withdrawal of life support. If I signed this, they could legally wheel me into an operating room and cut out my kidney without me ever saying a word. "I am not signing this," I said, dropping the papers onto the cot. "I am awake. I am conscious. I can make my own decisions." My father's face darkened. He took a step closer, looming over me. "You are not thinking clearly, Monique. You are on heavy medication. You are confused. We are trying to help you. Sign the damn paper." I shook my head, my heart pounding against my bruised chest. "No, get out of my room." The air in the room shifted, becoming thick with violence. My father grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin. "Sign it," he growled. "We do not have time for your stubbornness. Trey is getting worse by the hour. We need this done today." He picked up a pen and tried to jam it into my hand. My fingers were stiff and trembling, partly from fear, partly from weakness. I clenched my fist, refusing to hold the pen. "Open your hand," he shouted, spit flying onto my face. He forced my fingers open, shoving the pen between them. Then he grabbed my hand and tried to force it down onto the signature line. I felt like a child being disciplined, powerless against his strength. But then I remembered the accident. I remembered Jessica wiping the steering wheel. I remembered that I had saved them, and this was how they repaid me. A surge of adrenaline fueled by pure rage shot through me. I didn't try to pull away. Instead, I twisted my wrist and drove my fingernails deep into the soft flesh of his forearm. I scratched hard, drawing blood. My father roared in pain and surprise, letting go of my hand. He stumbled back, looking at the red welts on his arm. Then his eyes went black with fury. Without a word, he swung his hand and slapped me across the face. The impact was deafening in the small room. My head snapped to the side and I tasted copper in my mouth. My ear rang with a high-pitched whine. I slumped against the wall, stunned. My own father had just struck me. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had walked me to the bus stop, had just hit me because I wouldn't let him harvest my organs. "Dad, stop." Jessica appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide. But it wasn't concern for me that filled her voice. She rushed into the room and grabbed my father's arm, pulling him back. "You cannot hit her in the face," she hissed, looking at my swelling cheek. "The doctors will see it. If she has bruises, they might ask questions. We need her to look like a willing donor, not a victim of abuse. Think, Calvin." My father was breathing heavily, his chest heaving. He glared at me, rubbing his injured arm. "She scratched me," he spat. "The ungrateful little—" Jessica turned to me, her face softening into that mask of fake concern again. "Oh, Monique, look what you made him do. Why do you have to be so difficult? Just sign the papers, honey. It will make everything easier. We just want to save your brother. Do not you love Trey?" I looked up at them, blood trickling from my lip. I saw them for what they truly were. Monsters. But in that moment of pain, I also realized something crucial. Jessica was right. They couldn't damage me too much. They needed my body intact. They needed my kidney healthy. They couldn't kill me, and they couldn't beat me into a pulp, or the surgery would be called off. My body was my leverage. I spat the blood from my mouth onto the pristine white papers scattered on the floor. "I will never sign," I whispered, looking straight into my father's eyes. "You will have to kill me first, and if you do, the autopsy will show everything." My father lunged forward again, but Jessica held him back, whispering urgently in his ear. Finally, he straightened his jacket, shot me one last look of pure hatred, and stormed out of the room. Mr. Henderson, looking pale and shaken, gathered his briefcase and scurried after him. Jessica lingered for a moment, looking at the blood on the papers. "You are making a mistake, Monique," she said coldly. "There are other ways to get what we want." She turned off the light and slammed the door, locking it tight. I sat in the darkness, touching my throbbing cheek. It hurt, but for the first time since the accident, I smiled. I had drawn blood. I had fought back. And I knew now that as long as they needed my kidney, I was alive. And as long as I was alive, I was dangerous. The sound of crashing furniture echoed from down the hallway, jolting me from a light, pain-filled doze. Before I could orient myself in the dark maid's room, the door flew open. Jessica stood there breathless and manic, her eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of greed and desperation. She didn't say a word. She simply grabbed the front of my shirt and hauled me up. My broken leg dragged uselessly across the floor as she pulled me out of the room and down the corridor toward my home office. The room I had used to build my empire was unrecognizable. Files were scattered like confetti. My awards were smashed on the floor. In the center of the chaos stood the heavy steel safe that I had installed behind a false panel in the bookshelf. Jessica had found it. She threw me into the leather chair behind my desk, the movement sending a fresh wave of agony through my ribs. "Open it!" she hissed, slamming her hand against the cold metal of the safe door. I looked at her, feigning confusion. "Jessica, I can't. My head is spinning." "Don't play dumb with me, Monique," she screamed, grabbing a heavy brass paperweight from the desk. "We need cash. The doctor wants another 10,000 up front for the anesthesia team. And I know you keep emergency reserves in here. Open it now, or I swear to God I will smash your other leg." She raised the paperweight. I looked at her shaking hand and saw that she wasn't just desperate for Trey's medical bills. She was looking at the diamond necklace I kept in there. She was looking at the deeds to my investment properties. This wasn't about saving her husband. It was about securing her payout before I died on that operating table. "Okay," I whispered, putting my hands up in surrender. "Okay, Jessica, just put it down. I will give you the code." She lowered the brass weight, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She moved her finger to the digital keypad, waiting. "It is my graduation date," I lied, my voice trembling perfectly. 052012. Jessica punched the numbers in with aggressive force. Beep, 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 beep. The light on the safe blinked yellow. She frowned. It didn't open. You lied to me, she growled, turning to me with the paperweight raised again. No, no, I cried, shrinking back. I must have mixed it up. It is Dad's birthday. Try that. 08151955. She turned back to the keypad, her breathing heavy. She punched in the second code. Beep, 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 beep. The light blinked yellow again, faster this time. Last chance, Monique, she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. Give me the real code. I looked at the safe. I knew exactly what was happening. It was a high-security model I had configured for maximum risk protection. 3 wrong attempts didn't just lock it for 5 minutes. It triggered a permanent security lockdown that could only be overridden by a biometric key at the bank's main branch. More importantly, it sent a silent duress signal to the private security firm monitoring the house. Try the date I bought the house, I said, giving her the final piece of bait. 11032018. Jessica smiled, thinking she had finally broken me. She typed the numbers in slowly, savoring the victory. Beep, 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 click, whirr. The sound wasn't the door opening, it was the sound of deadbolts sliding into place inside the mechanism. The light on the keypad turned a solid, angry red. A piercing electronic tone emitted from the safe, signaling a total lockout. What did you do? Jessica screamed, hammering her fists against the steel door. It is locked. It won't let me type anything. I sat back in the chair, allowing a small, terrified tear to roll down my cheek. I don't know, Jessica. Maybe the battery died. I told you I was confused. She screamed in frustration and swept my laptop off the desk, smashing it onto the floor. But before she could turn her violence on me, her cell phone rang. It was my mother. Jessica answered it on speakerphone, her chest heaving. What is it, Sheila? Did you get the supplies? My mother's voice came through the speaker, shrill and hysterical, piercing the tension in the room. Jessica, you have to do something. I am at the checkout counter at Neiman Marcus. I have $5,000 worth of recovery linens and comfortable clothes for tray and bags. I tried to use Monique's black card. It was declined. Jessica froze. Declined. What do you mean declined? That card has a $50,000 limit. The woman at the register said it has been reported stolen. My mother shrieked, the humiliation evident in her voice. She cut the card right in front of me. Jessica, in front of everyone. People are staring. Do you know how embarrassing this is? I am Sheila Vance. I do not get declined. Put Monique on the phone right now. Jessica shoved the phone into my face. My mother was hyperventilating on the other end. You ungrateful, spiteful little wretch, my mother screamed. Did you cancel the cards? Is this your way of punishing us for trying to save your brother? I am standing here with security looking at me like I am a criminal because of you. I leaned toward the phone, my voice calm and steady. Mom, I didn't do anything. I have been locked in a closet without a phone for 2 days. Maybe the bank noticed unusual activity. You know, like someone buying designer sheets while their daughter is supposedly in a coma. Don't you dare get smart with me, she yelled. Fix this, Monique. Call the bank. Tell them it was a mistake. I need these things for Trey. He deserves the best cotton for his recovery. I can't call anyone. Mom, I said dryly. Jessica has my phone. Remember? Jessica pulled the phone away and ended the call, her face pale. She looked at the locked safe. She looked at the smashed laptop. She realized the walls were closing in. You are doing this, she whispered, staring at me with a new kind of fear. I don't know how, but you are doing this. She grabbed my hair and dragged me back to the maid's room, throwing me onto the cot with renewed violence. You stay here. I am going to take a shower and cool off. And when I come back, you are going to write a check. Or so help me God, I will break your other leg myself. She slammed the door and locked it. I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. I heard the water pipes groan as the shower in the master bathroom turned on. I moved instantly. The pain was excruciating, but the adrenaline was stronger. I scrambled to the corner and retrieved the teddy bear. I ripped the burner phone out. The screen flickered. 2% battery. It was blinking red, threatening to die at any second. I didn't have time to call. I didn't have time to explain. I opened the encrypted messaging app I used with my lawyer, Mr. Sterling. Sterling was not just a lawyer. He was a fixer, a man who knew where all the bodies were buried because he had helped bury some of them legally. My thumbs flew across the tiny keypad. Code red. Protocol 4. Protocol 4. It was the nuclear option. We had drafted it 3 years ago when I first started making real money and realized my family's greed was a bottomless pit. Protocol 4 meant total asset liquidation and immediate legal intervention. It meant the scorched earth policy. It meant that Sterling had permission to unleash the FBI, the IRS, and every private investigator on his payroll to destroy anyone holding me against my will. I pressed send. The sending icon spun. 1 second. 2 seconds. Please, I whispered to the dark room. Please. Sent. The screen went black immediately after. The phone was dead, but the message was out. I shoved the dead phone back into the bear and collapsed onto the cot, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I closed my eyes and smiled. They wanted my money. They wanted my organs. They wanted my life. But they had no idea what Protocol 4 really meant. They thought they were dealing with a helpless patient. They were about to find out they had declared war on a fortress, and the cavalry was coming. Not with horses, but with federal warrants. The sun had barely risen when the doorbell rang again, but this time the rhythm was different. It was not the impatient, entitlement-fueled ringing of my mother or the frantic pressing of Jessica. It was a single heavy press followed by a silence that felt heavy with dread. I lay on the thin cot in the maid's room, my body stiff and aching from the cold floor and the lack of proper medical care. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing, trying to calm the erratic thumping of my heart. I knew that whoever was at the door was not there to save me. I heard the heavy oak front door creak open, followed by my father's low, hushed tones. Then a new voice entered the house. It was a voice that scraped against my nerves like sandpaper. It was raspy, confident, and utterly devoid of warmth. I recognized the smell before I saw the man. As the footsteps approached my small prison, the scent of stale cigarette smoke, cheap aftershave, and rubbing alcohol seeped under the door. It was the smell of a man who had stopped caring about hygiene, or perhaps a man who was trying too hard to cover up something rotter. The lock turned and the door swung open. My father stood there looking more haggard than I had ever seen him, but his eyes were hard. Behind him stood a man I assumed was Dr. Miller. He did not look like the doctors I worked with in my risk assessment files. He wore a frayed suit jacket over a wrinkled shirt, and his eyes were bloodshot, darting around the room as if he expected the police to jump out from the shadows. He carried a battered medical bag that looked like it had seen better decades. "Is this her?" Miller asked, pointing a nicotine-stained finger at me. "Yes," my father replied, stepping aside. "She is sedated. We have been keeping her on a low diet, just like you said." Miller stepped into the room, filling the small space with his oppressive presence. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask me how I was feeling. To him, I was not a patient. I was a container, a vessel holding the precious cargo he had been hired to extract. He pulled a stethoscope from his bag, the metal cold against my skin, as he shoved my shirt up without asking. He pressed it against my chest, listening for a moment, then moved to my abdomen, prodding my kidneys with rough, ungentle hands. I flinched, a gasp escaping my lips, but I kept my eyes squeezed shut, feigning a drug-induced stupor. "Good," Miller grunted, straightening up and wiping his hands on a handkerchief. "Strong heartbeat, no signs of infection. The trauma from the crash seems superficial. The organ should be in prime condition." He turned to my father, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But we cannot do this here, Calvin. Too risky. If she crashes on the table, you do not want a corpse in your penthouse. It raises too many questions. My father shifted his weight, the floorboards creaking. So what do we do? We cannot take her to a hospital. She has no power of attorney signed. She refused. Miller let out a short bark like laugh. Hospitals are for people who want to follow the rules. I have a private facility. It is off the books. A basement clinic in the old industrial district. Fully equipped. No cameras, no records. We take her there tonight. I lay there, my blood turning to ice in my veins. A basement clinic. It sounded like the setting of a horror movie, the kind where no one makes it out alive. I forced my breathing to remain shallow, praying they wouldn't notice I was listening to every word of my own death sentence. They moved out into the hallway, leaving the door slightly ajar. I strained my ears, desperate to catch the details. It is going to cost you. Miller said, his voice clearer now. The price has gone up. My anesthesiologist is nervous. This is a high-profile family. If this goes south, we all go to prison for life. How much? My mother's voice joined the conversation, sharp and impatient. 50,000, Miller said flatly. In cash. Unmarked bills. Before I make the first cut, I heard my mother gasp. 50,000. We agreed on 30. That was before I saw the police report about the crash, Miller countered smoothly. That was before I knew she was the one who supposedly caused the accident. Look, here is the plan. I take the left kidney. I transplant it into your son immediately. We tell the authorities she had a cardiac event due to the trauma of the crash, an embolism. It happens all the time with crush injuries. I write the death certificate myself. Cause of death, natural complications. She gets cremated, no autopsy, no evidence. You get your son back and your problem disappears. My problem disappears. That was me. I was the problem. I waited for my parents to protest. I waited for my father to say that 50,000 was too much to pay for murdering his daughter. I waited for my mother to remember that I was the one who bought her that diamond bracelet she wore every Sunday. But the silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. We do not have 50,000 in cash right now. Jessica's voice piped up, sounding more annoyed than horrified. She locked the safe. The accounts are frozen. Miller's bag clicked shut. Then I cannot help you. Call me when you have the money, or watch your son die. Your choice. Wait, my father said, desperation cracking his voice. We have assets. We have things we can sell. We can sell the Range Rover, Jessica said quickly, her voice rising with excitement. The one she was driving. It is barely damaged. The airbags deployed, but the engine is fine. It is worth at least 80,000. But the title, my mother argued, the title is in her name. Jessica laughed, a cold, chilling sound. Mom, I have been practicing her signature for years. I signed for all her packages. I can forge the transfer of ownership in 5 minutes. We take the car to that sketchy dealer in South Chicago, the one who buys without asking questions. He will give us 60,000 cash on the spot. I felt a tear slide down my temple, disappearing into my hair. They were going to sell my own car, the car I had almost died in, to save them, to pay the hitman who would kill me. The irony was so sharp it felt like a physical blade. Do it, my father said, his voice final. Jessica, get the title from the desk. Sheila, get the car ready. Dr. Miller, we will have the money by this evening. Excellent, Miller said. Bring her to the loading dock behind the old textile factory on 4th Street at midnight. Do not be late, and make sure she does not eat anything else. I want her empty when I open her up. The heavy footsteps moved away toward the front door. The deal was done. My life had been bartered for a luxury SUV and a stack of dirty cash. I heard the front door close, sealing my fate. Tonight. Midnight. I stared at the ceiling of my prison, the darkness swirling around me. I had less than 12 hours. My protocol with Sterling had been initiated, but government wheels turned slowly. The FBI needed warrants. They needed probable cause. They might not get here in time. I looked at my broken leg. I looked at the locked door. I was alone, injured, and out of time. But as the fear threatened to paralyze me, a new feeling took root. It was a cold, hard resolve. They wanted me empty. They wanted me weak. But they had forgotten one thing. I was a risk assessor. I spent my entire life calculating the odds of survival in the worst-case scenarios, and I knew that even when the house always wins, there is always a way to cheat the dealer. I wiped the tear from my face. I would not die in a basement, not tonight, not ever. The clock was ticking, but for the first time in days I was ready to start the countdown on my own terms. The silence that descended upon the penthouse that evening was far more terrifying than the screaming matches had been. For days I had been treated like a prisoner, fed scraps like a dog, and locked in the dark. But as the sun began to set, casting long blood-red shadows across the floor of the maid's room, the atmosphere shifted. The lock clicked, but the door didn't slam open. Instead, it glided open smoothly. Jessica stepped inside. She was not holding a weapon or a demand letter. She was holding a silver hairbrush and a warm, fluffy towel. Her face was washed clean of the sneer she had worn for the past 48 hours. In its place was a soft, beatific smile that chilled me to the bone. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her voice dropping to a gentle coo. "I thought you might want to freshen up. You have had such a hard time. Let me help you with your hair." I sat up on the cot, my back pressed against the cold wall. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to fight, to claw her eyes out. But I knew the plan. I had to play the part. I had to be the submissive, broken victim they believed me to be. I let her sit on the edge of the cot. I let her reach out and touch me. As she began to brush through my tangled hair, her strokes were rhythmic and hypnotic. It was sickening. This was the woman who had framed me for a crime I didn't commit, who had robbed my safe, who was planning to kill me. And now she was grooming me. Like a prize pig before the county fair, like a lamb before the slaughter. "Your hair is so thick, Monique," she murmured, pulling the brush through a knot with surprising gentleness. "Trey always said you had the good genes. It is a shame you never really did anything with your looks. You were always so buried in your work. But do not worry. After tonight, everything will be different." She was right. Everything would be different. But not in the way she thought. A few minutes later, my mother walked in. She was carrying a tray, and the smell hit me instantly. It wasn't the cold gray oatmeal of yesterday. It was rich, savory chicken soup smelling of sage and thyme. It was her special recipe, the one she used to make when I was a child and had the flu. The smell brought tears to my eyes, not from nostalgia, but from the sheer cruelty of it. She was using my childhood memories as a weapon. "Here you go, baby," my mother said, placing the tray on my lap. She sat on the other side of me, sandwiching me between their fake love. "You need to keep your strength up. Dr. Miller said your vitals need to be stable for the procedure." She couldn't even say the word surgery. She couldn't say amputation. She couldn't say murder. I looked down at the soup. Steam curled up from the golden broth. It looked perfect. But I knew better. I looked at my mother's hands. They were trembling slightly. She was tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous tic she had had for 30 years. She was lying. There was something in the soup. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered, forcing my voice to sound weak and grateful. "I am so hungry." "Eat slowly," Jessica advised, watching me with the intensity of a hawk. "We want you to feel comfortable. We want you to be at peace." At peace. That was code for unconscious. I picked up the spoon. My hand shook partly from act, partly from genuine terror. I dipped it into the broth and brought it to my lips. As the liquid touched my tongue, I didn't swallow immediately. I let it sit there for a fraction of a second. My training as a risk assessor wasn't just about spreadsheets and actuarial tables. I had taken courses on corporate security, on recognizing threats, including biological and chemical ones. Underneath the heavy masking agents of sage and garlic, there was a faint metallic bitterness. It was subtle. If I hadn't been looking for it, I might have missed it. But it was there. Benzodiazepines. Or maybe something stronger, a sedative cocktail designed to knock me out without lowering my heart rate too dangerously. I made a show of swallowing, but I held the liquid in the pocket of my cheek. "It is delicious," I said, giving them a small, sleepy smile. I took another spoonful and another, hiding each mouthful in my cheeks until my jaw began to ache. I needed a way to get rid of it. I needed a distraction. I think I need a napkin," I said, pointing to the nightstand across the room. I spilled a little. Jessica turned her head to look. In that split second, I spat the mouthful of toxic soup into the thick fold of the paper napkin I was clutching in my hand. I wiped my mouth vigorously to cover the action. By the time she turned back, I was chewing on empty air, pretending to finish a piece of chicken. I repeated this dance for 10 agonizing minutes. Distract, spit, wipe, pretend. I managed to empty half the bowl into the napkin, which was now a soggy, heavy ball of evidence in my hand. "I feel strange," I slurred, letting my eyelids droop. "My head. It feels so heavy." "That is just the food settling, honey," my mother said, her voice tight. "Just relax. Let it happen." I let the spoon clatter into the bowl. I allowed my head to roll back against the wall. I slowed my breathing, making it deep and rhythmic. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I went limp. Silence filled the room. I could feel their eyes on me. They were waiting, watching. "Is she out?" Jessica whispered. My mother leaned forward. She pinched my arm hard. It hurt, but I didn't flinch. I was a statue. I was a corpse in waiting. "She is out," my mother said, letting out a breath that sounded like a shudder. God, I hate this part. She looks so innocent when she sleeps. "Stop it, Sheila." Jessica snapped, her voice instantly losing its sugary coating. "Do not get cold feet now. Think about Trey. Think about the kidney. Think about the life we are going to have once she is gone." I heard the rustle of fabric as Jessica stood up. She walked over to me. I felt her breath on my ear. She wasn't checking my breathing. She was taunting me. Even though she thought I couldn't hear, she couldn't resist one final victory lap. "Thank you for the donation, Monique," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You finally served a purpose. Do not worry about your money. I am going to spend it so well. I am going to turn this maid's room into a walk-in closet for my shoes. And Trey. He is going to forget you ever existed. Goodbye, sister." Every muscle in my body wanted to tense up to grab her throat and squeeze. But I stayed limp. I had to wait. The trap wasn't sprung yet. "All right, let's get it over with." My father's voice boomed from the doorway. He had been waiting in the hall. "The van is pulled up to the service entrance. Miller is waiting at the clinic." I felt rough hands grab me. My father took my shoulders. Jessica took my feet. They didn't treat me like a patient. They lifted me like a piece of furniture, like a rolled-up carpet. "Careful with the leg," my mother hissed. Miller said not to jostle the body too much. "We do not want stress hormones spiking." They carried me out of the maid's room, down the long hallway of the penthouse I had bought with my own sweat and blood. We passed the living room where my pictures used to hang. We passed the kitchen where they had poisoned my soup. They carried me out the back door into the service elevator. The descent was smooth, but my stomach turned with every floor we passed. We were going down, into the underworld. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage. The air hit me cold, damp, and smelling of exhaust fumes. It was the smell of the end. They walked toward a white, unmarked van. I heard the sliding door rattle open. They swung me inside, dumping me onto a mattress in the back that smelled of bleach and old copper. Blood. It smelled like blood. Jessica climbed in beside me. My father slammed the doors shut, sealing us in darkness. The engine roared to life. As the van lurched forward, heading toward the illegal clinic where Dr. Miller was sharpening his scalpels, I lay in the dark, my eyes closed, my breathing slow. They thought they were transporting a body. They thought they were driving toward their salvation. They had no idea they were driving straight into the arms of the FBI. And I was the Trojan horse that was going to burn their entire world down. The metal floor of the van was cold enough to seep through the thin mattress and bite into my skin, but I welcomed the chill. It was the only thing keeping me grounded in reality as the vehicle lurched through the Chicago streets. I lay perfectly still, my body rolling slightly, with every turn my eyes squeezed shut. To my father driving in the front seat, and my sister-in-law Jessica sitting by my feet, I was nothing more than unconscious cargo, a problem being transported to a solution. But inside my mind was racing with the precision of a GPS tracker. I counted the seconds between stops. We had been driving for 20 minutes. The smooth hum of the asphalt on the highway had given way to the rhythmic thumping of potholes and gravel. We were off the main roads. I felt the van bank hard to the left, then slow down significantly. I counted 3 speed bumps. 1, 2, 3. My internal map lit up. We were in the old industrial district down by the river, the part of the city where the streetlights were broken and the buildings were hollowed-out shells of former factories. It was the perfect place for a crime that required silence. Jessica shifting her weight on the wheel well. She was humming a soft tune, something cheerful and completely at odds with the fact that she was sitting next to a woman she believed she was about to murder. It was a chilling reminder of her sociopathy. She wasn't nervous, she was excited. She was probably mentally decorating my penthouse, already picking out new curtains with the money she would get from selling my life. The van came to a sudden halt, throwing me forward slightly. I forced my body to remain limp, resisting the urge to brace myself. The engine died and silence flooded the cramped space. I heard the heavy sliding door of a warehouse roll open, followed by the sound of the van starting up again and creeping forward. We were driving inside. They were hiding the vehicle so no one would see them unloading the body. The back doors swung open, and the smell hit me instantly. It was a damp, cloying cocktail of mold rust and cheap industrial-strength bleach. It smelled like a slaughterhouse that had been hastily scrubbed clean. "Grab her legs, Jessica," my father ordered, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "And for God's sake, do not drop her. We need the merchandise intact." I felt Jessica's manicured hands grip my ankles. My father grabbed my shoulders. They hoisted me out of the van with a grunt, carrying me like a roll of discarded carpet. I let my head loll back, swinging sickeningly with their steps. Through the slit of my slightly parted eyelids, I saw concrete ceilings stained with water damage and flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry hornets. They carried me toward a heavy metal door. A man stepped out to meet them. It was Dr. Miller. In the harsh light of the warehouse, he looked even more disheveled than he had at the house. He was wearing a plastic apron over his clothes, the kind a butcher would wear, and he was pulling on a pair of latex gloves that snapped against his wrists with a sound like a gunshot. "Right this way," Miller said, his voice eager. "The theater is prepped." "Theater is..." We descended a flight of metal stairs, the grating clanging under their feet. The air grew colder, and the smell of chemicals grew stronger. We were going underground into a basement that likely did not exist on any city blueprint. This was where licenses went to die, and where desperation was currency. The room they brought me into was terrifying in its functionality. It was not a sterile operating theater. It was a concrete box with a drain in the floor. 2 surgical tables stood in the center, illuminated by portable floodlights. Beside the tables stood 2 men who looked more like bouncers than medical assistants. They were thick-necked and silent, with arms the size of tree trunks. These were the enforcers Miller had hired to make sure the patient did not wake up and run away. "Strip her down and prep the site," Miller commanded, gesturing to the table on the left. My father and Jessica dumped me onto the cold vinyl surface of the table. I felt hands on my clothes, tearing at the fabric rather than unbuttoning it. They stripped me down to my underwear, leaving me exposed and shivering in the freezing air. I felt the cold, wet swipe of an iodine sponge across my abdomen, painting a target on the skin they intended to slice open. "Restrain her," Miller barked. "I do not want involuntary muscle spasms messing up my incision." The 2 large men stepped forward. I felt heavy leather straps being pulled across my chest, my waist, and my legs. They cinched them tight, pinning me to the table. The buckle clicked into place, sealing my fate. I was trapped, bound and naked in a basement with 4 people who wanted me dead. From the table next to me came a giggling sound. It was Trey. "Look at her!" Trey slurred, his voice thick with the pre-op drugs Miller had given him. "She looks like a turkey ready for Thanksgiving." "Hey Mo, can you hear me? You are finally useful for something." I listened to my brother, my own flesh and blood, laughing at my helplessness. He was already hooked up to an IV, lying comfortably on his table, waiting to receive the theft of my life. He didn't see a person. He saw a spare part vending machine. My mother walked into my field of vision. She was holding my purse, the one she had taken from the house. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Dr. Miller. "Here is the rest of the cash," she said, handing him a thick envelope. "We sold the car. It is all there." Miller took the envelope, thumbing through the bills with greedy precision. He nodded, satisfied, and stuffed the money into a metal box on the counter. "Excellent," Miller said, turning back to me. "Let's begin." He picked up a scalpel from the metal tray. The blade caught the light of the floodlamps, gleaming with a terrifying sharpness. He stepped closer to my table, his eyes focused on the patch of iodine on my side. He didn't bother to check my vitals. He didn't bother to speak to the anesthesiologist because there wasn't one. He was just going to cut. My father stood by the door, unable to watch, but unwilling to leave. Jessica stood right next to Miller, her eyes wide with morbid fascination. "Do it," Jessica whispered. "Cut her." Miller raised the scalpel, his hand hovering inches from my skin. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could hear the shallow anticipation of his breathing. He tightened his grip on the handle, ready to make the first incision that would end Monique Vance and birth a new healthy Trey. In that split second before the steel touched my skin, I dropped the act. I stopped the shallow, rhythmic breathing of a sedated patient. I filled my lungs with a deep, sharp breath. And then I snapped my eyes open wide. I stared directly into Dr. Miller's bloodshot eyes. He froze, the scalpel hovering in midair. He blinked, confused by the sudden consciousness of the woman who was supposed to be in a coma. "You are going to lose a lot more than $50,000, I said, my voice clear, steady and cold as ice. Miller stumbled back, dropping the scalpel. It clattered onto the concrete floor with a sound that rang through the silence, like a bell tolling for their funeral. "She is awake," Miller screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "She is awake." My father spun around. Jessica gasped, covering her mouth. Trey stopped giggling, and the basement door exploded inward. The scalpel was hovering inches above my skin, a deadly silver bird waiting to land. But Dr. Miller's hand was no longer steady. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning terror, unable to comprehend that the woman he was about to butcher was looking back at him with the cold calculation of an executioner. The silence in the basement was absolute, broken only by the hum of the portable floodlights and the shallow, drug-induced breathing of my brother on the next table. My father and Jessica stood frozen, their mouths slightly open, waiting for the doctor to finish the job, unaware that the dynamic of power had just shifted violently in my favor. I did not blink. I locked my gaze onto Miller's bloodshot eyes and spoke, my voice cutting through the damp, chemical-laden air like a razor. "Zurich Canton Bank. Account number 744092. Holding a balance of $2.3 million as of this morning." Miller flinched as if I had physically struck him. The scalpel dipped dangerously close to my flesh before he jerked it back. "What did you say?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I smiled, a cold, mirthless expression that I knew terrified him more than any scream could have. I continued reciting the data I had memorized from the dossier my team had compiled on unlicensed practitioners years ago. "The account is under the name of a shell corporation, Miller Medical Consulting, but the beneficiary is you. And I wonder, does your wife know about the apartment in the Gold Coast you bought for your mistress Veronica? Or is that where you plan to hide after you murder me?" The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. He took a stumbling step back, the instrument of death slipping from his sweaty fingers and clattering onto the concrete floor. How he stammered, looking around the room as if expecting ghosts. "How do you know that I am a risk assessor, doctor?" I said, straining against the leather straps that bound me. I quantify threats for a living. And you are a walking liability. Did you really think you could kidnap a woman with my resources and simply make her disappear? Jessica stepped forward, her face twisted in panic. What is she talking about? Doctor, ignore her. She is delirious. Just pick up the knife and finish it. Miller looked at Jessica, then back at me. The greed in his eyes was being rapidly replaced by self-preservation. He shook his head, backing away toward the door. No. No, this is wrong. She knows too much. I cannot do this. This was supposed to be clean. Coward, my father roared, stepping away from the wall. He lunged toward the table, grabbing the fallen scalpel with a clumsy, desperate hand. If you won't save my son, I will do it myself. He raised the blade, his eyes manic. I braced myself, knowing that my father, a banker, had no idea how to perform surgery, but he certainly knew how to kill. But before he could bring the blade down, a thunderous boom shook the very foundations of the building. The heavy steel door at the top of the stairs didn't just open, it disintegrated. A concussive blast blew the hinges off, sending the metal slab crashing onto the concrete floor below with a deafening clang that knocked my father off his feet. Smoke and dust billowed into the room, instantly choking the air. Before my family could even scream, the room was flooded with blinding red laser sights cutting through the haze. Heavy boots slammed against the metal stairs, a rhythmic, terrifying drumbeat of justice descending into the underworld. Federal agents. Drop the weapon. Get on the ground. Now. The voices were amplified, distorted by tactical gear, bouncing off the concrete walls. A team of 6 men in full SWAT gear poured into the basement, their movements fluid and lethal. They fanned out instantly, weapons trained on every person standing. My father scrambled backward, dropping the scalpel as if it were burning hot. He raised his hands, shaking violently. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot! I am a civilian!" Jessica screamed, diving under the surgical table where Trey lay, trying to curl into a ball. My mother stood paralyzed, clutching her pearls, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Dr. Miller tried to run. He bolted toward the back exit, a rusted door behind the supply cabinets. But he didn't make it 3 steps. A tackle from a massive agent sent him sprawling face first onto the concrete. I heard the sickening crack of his nose breaking against the floor, followed by the definitive zip of plastic cuffs tightening around his wrists. "Clear." The shout echoed from the back of the room. "Clear" echoed from the front. In the midst of the chaos, the smoke began to clear, revealing a figure standing calmly at the bottom of the stairs. He was not wearing body armor. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, a silk tie, and holding a pristine leather briefcase. He stepped over the debris of the door with the grace of a man entering a boardroom, not a crime scene. It was Sterling, my lawyer, my fixer. He surveyed the room, his eyes passing over my cowering parents, the bleeding doctor, and finally landing on me strapped to the table. He walked over, unbuttoning his jacket with one hand, looking completely unbothered by the assault rifles surrounding him. He leaned down, his face appearing in my field of vision. "Sorry I am late, Monique," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "The traffic on the I-90 was absolute murder. You know how construction is this time of year?" I let out a breath I had been holding since I was thrown into the van. "You cut it a little close, Sterling." He winked, pulling a small knife from his pocket to slice through the leather straps binding my arms. I prefer to think of it as dramatic timing. As my hands came free, I sat up, rubbing the raw skin of my wrists. The scene before me was a masterpiece of destruction. Dr. Miller was being hauled to his feet, blood streaming from his nose, screaming about immunity and entrapment. Jessica was being dragged out from under the table by a female agent. Her expensive blowout was ruined, her face streaked with dust and mascara tears. "Get your hands off me!" Jessica shrieked, kicking her legs. "Do you know who I am? We are the victims here. That woman is crazy. She tried to kill us." My mother was sobbing loudly, pressed against the wall by an agent who was reading her Miranda rights. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Monique, tell them Tell them this is a mistake. We were just trying to help Trey and Trey. I looked over at the other table. My brother was still strapped down, blinking groggily against the harsh lights. The commotion had roused him, but the drugs kept him in a fog. He lifted his head, looking around with a dazed, stupid grin. "Hey," he mumbled, his voice slurred. "Is it over? Did I get the kidney? I feel thirsty." I swung my legs off the table and stood up. My fake cast thumped against the floor, but I put my full weight on it, standing tall. An agent approached me, offering a blanket, which I wrapped around my shivering shoulders. "Ms. Vance, are you injured?" the agent asked. I looked at my family, the people who had raised me, the people who had claimed to love me, now all in handcuffs, reduced to common criminals. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I am perfectly fine." My father was being shoved toward the stairs. He fought against the agent's grip, twisting his body to look back at me. His face was purple with rage and denial. He couldn't accept that his authority had been stripped away. He couldn't accept that his property had fought back. "Wait!" he screamed, his voice raw and desperate, echoing off the damp walls. "You cannot arrest us. This is a private matter. It is a family dispute." My daughter volunteered. "Do you hear me? She volunteered to give her organ. She is trying to frame us." I walked over to where the agents were holding him. I stood inches from his face, looking into the eyes of the man who had tried to carve me up for parts. I looked at the agent holding him. "Officer," I said, clearly ensuring the body cameras recorded every syllable, "I did not volunteer. And that man is not my father. He is just the man who drove the getaway car. Take him away." The chaos of the raid began to settle into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the click of handcuffs and the sobbing of my mother. The FBI agents had secured the perimeter, and Dr. Miller was already being led away, his face a mask of bloody defeat. My lawyer Sterling whispered something to the lead agent, who nodded slowly and gestured for the officers holding my parents to pause. They wanted a statement. They wanted closure. But Sterling knew what I really wanted. I wanted them to see me standing tall one last time. I sat on the edge of the surgical table, the cold steel biting into my skin through the thin hospital gown. My family watched me from the wall where they were being detained. My father Calvin looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting between the armed agents and me. Jessica was huddled on the floor, her makeup ruined, shaking violently. And Trey was still lying on the other table, looking pale and confused, the drugs beginning to wear off enough for fear to set in. I took a deep breath and swung my legs off the table. My father's eyes widened as my feet hit the concrete floor. He was expecting me to crumble. He was expecting me to cry out in pain from the broken leg that had kept me trapped in a wheelchair for days. But I did not crumble. I stood up straight, shifting my weight fully onto both legs. I took a step forward, then another, walking with a steady, confident rhythm that echoed in the silent basement. Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You are walking." Her voice was a shrill whisper. "But your leg, the cast, the crash." "It was never broken," I said, my voice calm and carrying to every corner of the room. "It was a hairline fracture, Jessica. Painful, yes, but not crippling. The heavy cast, the wheelchair, the helplessness. It was all a performance. I needed you to believe I was weak, so you would show me exactly how cruel you could be, and you did not disappoint." My father's face turned a deep, violent shade of purple. He struggled against the agent holding him, straining to lunge at me. "You liar! You manipulated us. We are your family, Monique. How could you set us up like this? We were trying to save your brother." "Save him," I repeated, stopping just a few feet away from them. "Is that what you call kidnapping? Is that what you call hiring a disgraced butcher to cut open your daughter in a basement? You were not saving anyone, Calvin. You were stealing. You felt entitled to my body, just like you felt entitled to my money. You have 2 kidneys," my father screamed, spitting the words out, his desperation turning into madness. "You only need one to live. Trey is dying. He is your brother. It is your duty. You are selfish, Monique. You have always been selfish. You would let him die just to spite us. You are a monster." The agents tightened their grip on him, but I held up a hand signaling them to let him speak. I wanted him to say it all. I wanted the cameras to record every ounce of his entitlement. "So that is it?" I asked softly. "It all comes down to the biology. You think because I have 2 kidneys and Trey has none that work, I am obligated to be his spare parts. That is the only value I have to you." "Yes," my father hissed. "It is biology. It is fair." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing for him. No anger, no sadness, just pity. "Biology is a funny thing, Dad," I said, reaching for the hem of my hospital gown. "You think you know everything about me because you raised me, but you stopped looking at me a long time ago. You stopped caring about who I was, or what I did the day you realized I wasn't going to be the obedient little girl you wanted." I gripped the fabric of the gown and lifted it up, exposing my abdomen to the harsh glare of the floodlights. "Look," I commanded. My father looked. My mother looked through her tears. Jessica looked. Even Trey strained his neck to see. They were expecting to see smooth, unblemished skin, marked only by the fresh orange iodine square that Dr. Miller had painted on my left side. But I did not show them my left side. I turned slightly, exposing my right flank. There, running diagonally across my lower back, was a scar. It was old and faded, a white ridge of healed tissue about 4 inches long. It was the mark of a major surgery performed years ago. My mother let out a strangled sound, a gasp that sounded like she was choking on air. "What is that? What is that on your back?" I dropped the gown, letting it fall back into place. "That is a nephrectomy scar, Mom," I said, watching the realization dawn on them like a slow horror movie. 5 years ago, I donated my right kidney. Silence. Absolute crushing silence. My father's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Jessica looked like she had been slapped. "You..." "What?" my father whispered, his voice trembling. You gave it away." I smiled a sad, tired smile. "Do you remember Mrs. Gable, my high school math teacher? The one who encouraged me to join the debate team? The one who wrote my recommendation letters for college when you were too busy taking Trey to football camps? She went into renal failure 5 years ago. I was a match. I didn't tell you because I knew you would try to stop me. I knew you would say she wasn't family. But she was more family to me than you have ever been. She is alive today because of me." Trey let out a low moan from the table. But you have 2. You have the other one. The left one." Dr. Miller said. "He said he could take the left one." I turned to look at my brother lying there helpless and pathetic. I walked over to his table, looking down at him. "I do have a left kidney, Trey," I said gently. "But here's the thing about risk assessment. You always check the details. You see, when they did the scans for my donation to Mrs. Gable, they found something interesting. My left kidney is atrophic. It is a birth defect. It is undersized and functions at about 15% capacity. It is enough to keep me alive, barely. But if you transplant it into a grown man, it would fail within hours." I turned back to my father and Dr. Miller, who was listening from where he was cuffed on the floor. "If you had cut me open tonight, Dr. Miller," I said, my voice hard as stone, "you would have killed me instantly. My body cannot survive on 0 kidneys. And Trey, he would have received a useless piece of dying tissue. He would have died on this table right next to me." The weight of my words crashed down on them. My father's knees gave out. He slumped in the agent's grip, his face turning an ashy gray. He realized it. Finally. He realized the magnitude of his failure. They had kidnapped me. They had drugged me. They had destroyed their careers, their reputation, and their freedom. They had sold my car, emptied my accounts, and burned every bridge they had. And for what? For a kidney that did not exist. For a cure that was never there. "You lied," my mother wailed, sliding down the wall to sit on the dirty floor. "You didn't tell us. Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you never asked," I replied. "You never asked how I was. You never asked about my life. You just assumed I was a vessel waiting to be used. You gambled everything on a lie you told yourselves. And now you have lost everything." Dr. Miller let out a laugh, a hysterical broken sound from the floor. "I would have killed her for nothing. I would have gone to the electric chair for a lemon." I looked at Sterling, who was standing by the stairs watching the scene with a grim satisfaction. He checked his watch and nodded to the lead agent. "Take them away," I said, turning my back on my family. "No, wait, Monique, please!" Trey screamed as the agents began to haul them toward the exit. "I am sick, Mo. I am really sick. You have to help me. You have money. You can buy me one. Don't let them take me to prison. I will die in there." I stopped and looked over my shoulder. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you tried to murder the only person who was willing to save you," I said. "Goodbye, Trey." I listened to their screams fade as they were dragged up the metal stairs and out into the night. I stood alone in the center of the basement, surrounded by the wreckage of their greed. I was scarred. I was exhausted. But I was whole. And as I looked at the empty surgical table where I was supposed to die, I realized that the only thing they had successfully removed from my life was themselves. The fluorescent lights of the precinct interrogation room hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to amplify the tension inside. I stood on the other side of the one-way mirror, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the final disintegration of the family unit that had tried to consume me. Inside the room sat Jessica, the woman who had sneered at me in my own home, who had poured soup down the sink while I starved, was now a shivering wreck. Her mascara was running in dark rivets down her cheeks, and her expensive blouse was wrinkled and stained with sweat. She was not looking at the detective. She was looking at the camera in the corner, screaming to be heard. "I am telling you, it was not my idea," she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "I am just the daughter-in-law. I married into this madness. Calvin and Sheila are the ones who planned it. They are the ones who contacted Dr. Miller. They forced me to go along with it. They said if I didn't help them, they would cut Trey off from the inheritance. I was a hostage just like Monique." I watched as my parents, who were handcuffed to a bench in the holding area outside the room, could hear her through the open door. My mother, Sheila, let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She lunged toward the door, her chains rattling against the metal bench. "You liar!" she screamed, her face twisted in a mask of pure betrayal. "You were the one who found the doctor. You were the one who forged the title to the Range Rover. You told us Monique was better off dead. How dare you blame us?" The detective inside the room leaned back in his chair, looking bored but satisfied. He knew he didn't have to do much work. They were doing it for him. They were tearing each other apart piece by piece, desperate to climb over each other's bodies to escape the consequences of their actions. Jessica continued to babble, spilling every secret she knew. She told them about the offshore accounts my father used to hide money. She told them about the illegal prescriptions Trey bought online. She told them about the time my mother bribed a city official to overlook a zoning violation. She was burning the entire family tree to the ground, hoping the ashes would provide her some cover. But she didn't know that I had already planted the dynamite long before she started talking. The door to the observation room opened, and Sterling walked in. He looked as fresh and composed as ever, holding a thick file folder. He stood beside me, watching Jessica hyperventilate on the other side of the glass. "She sings like a canary, doesn't she?" he remarked quietly. "It is a shame she is singing the wrong tune. She thinks she can trade information for immunity, but she doesn't know about the audit." I smiled. The audit. It was the trap I had laid 2 days ago when I gave Jessica the fake password to the safe. Sterling walked into the interrogation room. Jessica looked up, hope flaring in her eyes, thinking her lawyer had arrived. But Sterling wasn't there for her. He placed the file on the metal table with a heavy thud. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice smooth and cold. I am representing the estate of Monique Vance, and while you are busy confessing to conspiracy to commit murder, I thought you might want to address the charges of grand larceny and corporate embezzlement. Jessica blinked, confused. What embezzlement? I didn't steal from a company. Sterling opened the file, revealing a spreadsheet highlighted in red. 2 days ago, you accessed Monique's private server using a password she provided under duress. You thought you were transferring funds from her personal savings to an offshore account. But Monique is a risk assessor. She set up a honeypot. The account you accessed was a dummy terminal designed to track unauthorized entry. When you initiated the transfer, you didn't move money. You moved digital markers that traced back to your personal accounts. We have a record of you attempting to wire $50,000 of what you thought was stolen money to Dr. Miller. That is wire fraud. That is money laundering. And since you used your own laptop to do it, we have your IP address, your fingerprints, and your facial recognition login. Jessica slumped in her chair, the air leaving her body. She realized then that she hadn't just been caught. She had been outplayed. And as for your husband, Sterling continued, turning to the window where Trey was being fingerprinted. The police found quite a collection in his jacket pocket when they booked him. OxyContin, fentanyl, and enough uncut heroin to charge him with intent to distribute. It seems your husband wasn't just a user. He was holding for his dealer to pay off his debts. That carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years in federal prison. I watched Trey through the glass. He was staring at his ink-stained fingers, looking small and pathetic. The golden child who had been protected from every consequence his entire life was finally facing a wall he couldn't climb over. The detective stood up, cuffing Jessica again. You are looking at 20 years, Mrs. Vance, and that is if the judge is in a good mood. I turned away from the window. I didn't need to see any more. The image of them turning on each other was enough. They were not a family. They were a pack of wolves that had finally run out of prey and turned on themselves. Hours later, the sun was rising over the Chicago skyline, casting long shadows across the pavement outside the precinct. My parents had managed to post bail using the last of their liquid assets and the equity in their primary residence. They stumbled out of the station doors, looking aged and broken. Their clothes were wrinkled from a night in the holding cell, and the arrogance that usually carried them was gone, replaced by a shell-shocked tremoring. They saw me standing by my car. Sterling was holding the door open for me. My father stopped, his eyes locking onto mine. He looked like he wanted to scream, to hit me, to demand I fix this. But he did nothing. He knew I held all the cards. We are going to the country house, my mother muttered, clutching her purse to her chest. We will regroup there. We will fight this, Monique. You haven't won yet. That house is in the family trust. You cannot touch it. I looked at them with a pity that felt worse than hate. Mom, I said softly, you really should check your email more often. Or maybe just read the documents you signed years ago when you made me the executor of the trust, because you didn't want to pay the taxes. What are you talking about? She whispered. I nodded to Sterling. He reached into the back seat of my car and pulled out a large red sign. He didn't say a word, he just held it up. Sold. You see, I continued. While you were busy planning my murder, I was busy liquidating assets. As the trustee, I have the power to sell property if it is deemed in the best interest of the beneficiary. Since Trey is going to prison and you two are facing massive legal fees, I decided the best interest was to donate the proceeds. Donate? My father choked out. Donate to who? To the National Kidney Foundation, I said. And a shelter for victims of domestic abuse. The sale closed this morning. The new owners are already changing the locks. Your clothes are in a box on the curb. Everything else, the furniture, the art, the memories, it is all gone. My mother let out a scream that tore through the morning air. She fell to her knees on the sidewalk, grabbing at the hem of my pants. Monique, please. We have nowhere to go. The penthouse is a crime scene. Our accounts are frozen. You cannot leave us on the street. We are your parents. I looked down at the woman who had birthed me. I looked at the man who had tried to cut me open. and I felt the last tether of obligation snap. "You are right," I said, stepping back out of her reach. "You are my parents, and you taught me a very valuable lesson. A burden is something you carry until it becomes too heavy, then you put it down." I got into the car. Sterling closed the door. As we drove away, I watched in the rearview mirror. They were standing on the sidewalk, two small, shrinking figures against the massive, indifferent city. They had no home. They had no money. They had no son. And for the first time in their lives, they had no one to blame but themselves. They were finally exactly what they had always accused me of being: a burden that no one wanted to carry. The gavel struck the mahogany-sounding block with a finality that echoed through the packed courtroom, sealing the fate of the people who had tried to harvest my life for spare parts. 6 months had passed since the FBI raided the basement clinic, and in that time the wheels of justice had turned slowly, but with crushing weight. I sat in the front row wearing a tailored white suit that symbolized my rebirth, watching as the judge read the sentences. Dr. Miller was up first. The man who had violated his oath for a stack of cash stood trembling as the judge condemned him to 20 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder and human trafficking. He collapsed into his chair, weeping into his hands, but I felt no pity. He was a predator who had finally been caged. Then came my parents. Calvin and Sheila Vance stood together, but they looked miles apart. The united front they had presented all my life had shattered under the pressure of the investigation. They had spent the last 6 months blaming each other, but the law held them equally accountable. 10 years each. The judge called their actions a grotesque violation of parental duty. My mother looked back at me, her eyes searching for salvation one last time, but I simply held her gaze until she looked away in shame. Jessica received 5 years thanks to her cooperation, but her social life, her reputation, and her future were destroyed. She was led away in handcuffs, sobbing about how unfair it was, but the glares from the jury told a different story. And finally, there was Trey. My brother was not in the courtroom. He was watching via video link from a secure medical facility within the prison system. The judge sentenced him to mandatory rehabilitation followed by incarceration. He would spend the next decade in a cell receiving dialysis 3 times a week, a prisoner of the very condition he had tried to kill me to cure. As the screen faded to black, I stood up and walked out of the courtroom. The air outside had never smelled so sweet. A week later, I found myself walking down the sterile gray corridor of the state penitentiary. The heavy steel doors buzzed open and shut behind me, creating a rhythm of confinement that made me appreciate my freedom with every step. I was there to see Trey one last time. I sat on a metal stool looking through the thick plexiglass barrier. When the guards brought him in, I barely recognized him. The golden child was gone. In his place sat a gaunt, yellowing shadow of a man. His skin was sallow from the kidney failure, and his eyes were sunken deep into his skull. He picked up the phone, his hand trembling violently. "Monique," he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "You came. I knew you would come. You are going to get me out, right? You have to get me out. The dialysis here is awful. The food is terrible. I am dying in here, Mo. Please, I am sorry. I am so sorry. Just talk to the lawyers. Fix this." I listened to him beg. I listened to him use the same manipulative tone he had used since we were children, expecting me to clean up his mess, expecting me to sacrifice myself for his comfort. But that version of Monique was dead. She had died in that basement clinic. I did not pick up the receiver on my side of the glass. I did not say a word. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a small paperback book. I placed it in the transfer drawer and slid it across to him. Trey looked at the book confused. He read the title aloud, his lips moving slowly. The Art of Being Human. He looked up at me, anger flaring in his eyes. "What is this? Is this a joke? I need a kidney, Monique, not a book." I looked him in the eye for a long moment. I let the silence stretch between us, a heavy curtain falling on our relationship. I wanted him to understand that the Bank of Monique was closed forever. There would be no more bailouts, no more protection. He was finally going to have to learn how to be a human being on his own. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. Trey started screaming, slamming his fist against the glass. "Don't walk away from me. I am your brother. You owe me. Come back here." I turned my back on his screams. I walked toward the exit, and I did not look back. Not even once. As the heavy door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the sound of his voice, I felt lighter than I had in 30 years. That evening back in my penthouse, I stood before the full-length mirror in my bedroom. The room was yours again, filled with my things, my energy. I untied my robe and let it fall to the floor. I turned slightly, looking at the scar on my right side. For years I had hidden it. I had been afraid it made me look damaged. But tonight, under the soft glow of the chandelier, I saw it differently. It was not a jagged line of loss. It was a silver thread of courage. It was proof that I was capable of immense love for the right person. I touched the skin over my left kidney, the small fighting organ that had kept me alive against all odds. We were a team, my body and I, and we had survived. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a warm, familiar voice answered. "Hello, Mrs. Gable, it is Monique." "Monique, my dear, how are you? I saw the news about the trial. I have been so worried." "I am fine, Mrs. Gable. I am better than fine. I was just looking at my passport, and I noticed it has been a long time since it was stamped. Do you still talk about wanting to see the Louvre?" There was a pause, and then I heard the smile in her voice. "Every single day." "Pack your bags, Mrs. Gable," I said, smiling at my reflection. "We are going to Paris, first class. I think we both deserve a celebration of life." I hung up the phone and walked out onto the balcony. The city lights of Chicago twinkled below me, a vast ocean of possibilities. I took a deep breath of the cool night air, letting it fill my lungs. I had lost my parents. I had lost my brother. I had lost the illusion of a happy family. But as I looked out at the horizon, I realized I hadn't lost anything that mattered. I had pruned the dead branches so the tree could finally grow. Blood does not define family. Actions define who deserves a seat at your table. Love is not a transaction, and your body is not a bargaining chip. I had been torn open and stitched back together not with surgical thread, but with resilience. My parents tried to take my life to save their legacy, but in the end they only gave me the push I needed to finally start living it. My name is Monique Vance, and this is not just a story of survival, it is a story of victory. Thank you for listening. If you have ever had to cut ties to save yourself, remember that the scar is just a reminder that you were stronger than whatever tried to hurt you. Be brave, be authentic, and never apologize for saving your own life.